I'm so stressed about this Apec test tomorrow. I don't know what to do. You know what? I'll just study later. It's fine. Ever since Sergei Vida introduced all these railroads, our life has been terrible.
I know, right? With all these new factories, living and working conditions have been terrible for us in the serfs. We barely have any land.
Because of these conditions and repressions, there was lots of built-up hatred, so soon enough they had to overthrow the Tsarist autocracy. This led to what we know now as the Revolution of 1905. But before we get into that, we must teach you about why the tension was so high within Russia. The Russo-Japanese War played a huge factor.
We defeated Russia after a surprise attack on them at Port Arthur on February 8, 1904, then again at Tsushima when they tried to attack.
Japan has now won the war. Now back to the Revolution of 1905. After the Russo-Japanese War, there was a huge food shortage which made many different groups very upset. We interviewed different groups to find out their differing opinions.
I am so mad about this lack of land.
We were being oppressed by our working and living conditions in this country's largest cities.
I am so dissatisfied with our domination by an ethnic Russian population because we are only 40% of the population.
This led to what we know as Bloody Sunday and caused a huge general strike, which forced Tsar Nicholas II to issue the October Manifesto. This granted civil liberties and agreed to create a legislative assembly known as the Duma, which was elected by broad franchise.
Soon enough, the autocratic ruler Tsar Nicholas II curtailed the power of the Duma.
Exterior Russia was also at its peak in strength when German policies abroad forced an alliance between Russia, Great Britain, and France, called the Triple Entente. Another alliance between Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Italy forced Russia to join a war they were not ready for. Rasputin began acting as a healer for the one and only son of Tsar Nicholas II, Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia. He was a divisive figure at court and seen by some Russians as a mystic, visionary, and prophet, and by others as a religious charlatan. He became a favorite of Nicholas's wife, but his political influence was minor.
Rasputin's influence over the royal family was used against him and the Romanovs by politicians and journalists who wanted to weaken the integrity of the dynasty, force the Tsar to give up his absolute political power, and separate the Russian Orthodox Church from the state.
After many assassination attempts, Rasputin finally died. This caused much chaos in Russia.
Down with the autocracy! Rise of the Soviets! We love the Duma!
The March Revolution took place in 1917, when the peasants and working-class people of Russia revolted against the government of Tsar Nicholas II. When ordered to kill the revolution, going against the king's orders, the soldiers joined instead. Over food shortages, unemployment, and pogroms led to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II. Soon after, the members of the Duma assumed control of the country, forming the Russian Provisional Government, led by Alexander Kerensky, the prime minister. This government was dominated by the interests of large capitalists and the noble aristocracy. The Provisional Government was designed to set up elections to the assembly while maintaining essential government services, but its power is effectively limited by the Petrograd Soviet's growing authority. The Provisional Government had the responsibility for the conduct of the war between February and October of 1917. During this time, the Soviets, such as Leon Trotsky, who was a Soviet revolutionary, Marxist theorist, and politician, were mostly Bolsheviks led by Vladimir Lenin, who campaigned for an immediate end of Russia's participation in the war, granting land to the peasants and providing bread to the urban workers. After being falsely accused of inciting an attempt to overthrow the Provisional Government, Lenin was forced to flee to Finland. Yet after another uprising, he was asked to return to help. When realizing how weak the Provisional Government was, he knew he had to overthrow and would have many on his side. They even developed slogans. Peace, land, bread. Peace, land, bread. Control the production. Worker control the production. To the Soviets. All power to the... After the fall of the Provisional Government, the November 1917 revolution occurred, which placed the Bolsheviks in power. On March 3, 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was signed by the communist government to try to keep the peace in Russia. Lenin took the place of Kerensky and seized control of the new government. The treaty did not keep peace for long, though, as the Russian Civil War soon occurred. The Russian Civil War was a civil war fought from November 1917 all the way up until October 1922 between several groups in Russia. The main fighting was between the Red Army of Communists and the White Army, which opposed the Communists. The Red Army was aided by the Cheka, who were the Bolshevik security force or the secret police. The Reds won, unsurprisingly, with the aid of the Cheka. Near the end of the Russian Civil War, the Communist Party and its leader, Vladimir Lenin, saw the need to retreat from socialist policies in order to maintain the party's hold on power. Lenin introduced war communism, which is the name for the economic policies that were introduced to Russia. The policy ended in 1921 because it was not successful. Accordingly, the 10th Party Congress in March 1921 introduced the measures of the new economic policy to try to help Russia get back on track. Lenin had saved Russia once again with establishing a new capitalistic system and more privatization of business. Lenin ends his life journey with a stroke, but at this time, Russia was officially the first communist state.